Okay, go for it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our last panel of 2021 in preparation for the release of our book, We Are But Your Children, An Oral History of the Nightclub ManRay. I am very honored to have as our final guest of the year, artist Steve and musician Steve Shook. Steve holds a very great distinction in the planning of our book, as he is the artist and creator of our cover for We Are But Your Children. And we are very happy to have you here, Steve. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I would like to give a little background into Steve. Give me one moment as I'm bringing up the information. Steve Shook is a Washington, D.C. based print artist and musician who spent the 1990s exploring the rich and fertile Boston music scene. Steve found the wide variety of nightlife to be intoxicating and partook in every flavor that he could find in regards to nightlife, from punk and garage rock at the Rat to reggae at the Western Front and indie at the Middle East and TT the Bear's Place. He found something for every itch that needed to be scratched. And some nights were even spent dancing at Axis or Venus de Milo, because why not? And you'll find that many of our folks here at ManRay will say, yes, why not? Steve is a husband and a parent, but still makes time for playing bass in two power pop bands. And I'm so happy that power pop is still front and center because I love it as a music genre. These bands are known as the Buzz and the Shady Sides. And in addition to this, Steve makes prints that pay homage to the venues and places that meant the most to him in his formative years and beyond. Steve presents himself as a pop culture historian and sometimes delves backwards in time to places that predate himself, but had a longer reaching significance to music and culture that he does call his own. Steve misses places like Bunratty's and Alston, which I do as well, and the Celador in Washington, D.C., and is keenly aware of the places they play in fostering the twin scenes that he cares about. As an artist, Steve's prints seems to have struck a nostalgic chord for people who feel the same as he does, a little wistful for simpler and more fun times. And I'm happy to report that Steve plans on continuing his prints for some time to come, and I'm very happy that he will. So, Steve, thank you for joining us. I just want to give a few announcements before we delve into sort of our discussion proper. So we've been very successful I feel like we've been very successful at having these panel sessions. This panel session is different because for the first time, we actually have a finished product that is in the process of being printed. Every time we've done one of these, the idea of the book has been this sort of amorphous, it's in progress, but now it's actually at the printers. And by the time we have our next one in January, we will actually have a book ready to sell. So yeah, it's an interesting transition. We want to say here, the team at We Are But Your Children are really excited because in the new year, we intend on keeping these panels going. We're going to be looking at the different dance nights that ManRay offered, including Crypt, the New Wave Night, Hell, and Fantasy Factory, as well as continuing our look chronologically at ManRay, and also looking at various different factors of ManRay, such as bartenders and front door people. We feel that there's still much to be told, so we'd like to spend much of 2022 really delving into that. So please be on the lookout for more of these as time goes on. So now to our guest, Steve. So Steve, we've had many people on these panels. We've had musicians, we've had DJs, and we've had just various people from all walks of life. And I've asked them, and photographers, I should mention that too. And I've asked them a similar question that I'm going to ask you right now, which is, in general, why art? Why art for you? What is it about it that makes you do what you do?
For me, the art kind of goes back to early in my life. As you might see behind me, those are all vintage skateboards. I've been a skateboarder since, gosh, the early '80s. and I've always been kind of like drawn to the imagery. Um, in addition to like skulls and dragons and all that other fun stuff, there was something about the way that the art was done, and it was all created via silkscreen, which was also the method Andy Warhol is most famous for popularizing. So I think that having spent some time early on in the company of other artists and getting to see how these silkscreen boards were done kind of firsthand, I've always been drawn to, oh, this is what I want to do. This is a great way for me to express myself.
What was Warhol a general did you like sort of immerse yourself with his artwork as in your youth?
Oh, in my youth and beyond, that could be a whole separate show. But yeah, I go to Pittsburgh at least once or twice a year just to visit the Warhol Museum.
Mm.
Pittsburgh being where he was actually from. So yeah, Warhol. The pop artists I think were definitely a big source of inspiration for me. If for no other reason than I just love simplicity and I love bright, vibrant colors. So I think that's kind of what translates through a lot of the prints that I'm doing today. I definitely harken back to the pop art palettes.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of Lichtenstein and
Yep,
Warhol
for
definitely
sure.
both they have that sort of pizzazz about them that and I think you're right, simplicity is a great word. It's not so overly complicated, and
Correct.
that's not to say anything bad about overcomplicated art, but sometimes it's just good to stare at a Campbell soup can and just kind of go to town.
No, I agree. I mean, I feel the same way about music. I mean, kind of like a lot of other uh folks who are probably tuning in right now, there was something about like when you discovered like punk, when you discovered the Ramones, like just the simplicity is the thing that sort of like grabbed you. It's like, okay, well, they're saying so much by doing and saying so very little, and I felt that kind of it leveled the playing field between folks who appreciated music and art and the musicians and artists themselves. There wasn't that big great divide anymore. You didn't have to be a virtuoso musician in order to express yourself musically. Likewise, simplicity in visual art kind of levels the playing field there. You don't have to go to the Sorbonne. You don't have to 10 different types of stippling and brush strokes. You can get some
Well,
spray paint, get some magic markers, do
yeah,
your
I
thing.
think I think that Warhol, especially with bringing the Velvet Underground in, um, does bridge that gap between art and music. And I love the Velvet Underground. I think that they're just absolutely talented, and it might not be everyone's cup of tea, but like I look at the Velvet Underground as bringing you into uh, MC5 and other bands that maybe you never heard of before, but do bring a sort of artistic sort of bent to the work they do.
Sure.
Um,
There's a
uh,
great new Velvet Underground documentary. I think Todd Haynes just put out.
oh, really?
Yeah, it's now and on the streaming services. Yeah, it's definitely worth a watch because to your point, yeah, I think that Warhol and the Velvet Underground, that kind of marriage right there was sort of like kind of the crux of like where visual art and music kind of like met and became these kind of their early multimedia happenings. The Exploding Plastic Inevitable, I think was the name of the parties they basically threw.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a huge fan of the factory stories and knowing that the factory happens in different sort of iterations, so to speak. But
Yeah, I think there were three of them.
yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about where you grew up and sort of when you were growing up, and this sort of kind of goes in line with what we're talking about. You know, tell me a little bit about what was inspiring to you growing up.
Sure.
If you're a musician and you're an artist, you're saturating yourself with inspiration. So tell me a little bit about where you grew up and what if there's anything germane to that area that sort of inspired you.
Sure. I grew up, well, I was born in Washington, D.C., grew up in the suburbs just outside. And I guess, but, when I got to early in high school and discovered the Ramones, I also discovered that there was like a very rich and fertile punk scene like happening like right in Washington, D.C. With that also kind of centered around Discord Records. you know, Minor Threat and Rites of Spring, The Faith, Iron Cross, Void. They were all, you know, people that were only maybe a year or two older than me, who had already started like their own record labels, you know, wrote, produced their own music. They toured. They're still in high school and they got in vans and like went across the country. I mean, that was a huge inspiration to me. It was an eye opener that, you know, wow, you can, you know, if you have like a little bit of initiative, I mean, you know, you can go out and do this stuff yourself. You don't have to wait till you're older to be a big rock star if that's what you wanted to be. I mean, you could like get three of your buddies and like, you know, as long as you get your shit together, I mean, like, you know, you can make a thing happen. And um I kind of sort of steeped myself in that. And, you know, it's something empowering when you see, you know, your peer group, you know, doing something great. You know, it's not the generation before you. You know, it's not people who live, you know, in New York City. It's people, you know, who live a half hour away from you. Um,
Yeah.
and there was a big crux there between the hardcore punk scene and skateboarding. So for me, it was kind of like sort of like the perfect storm of like art, music, and skateboarding. It all kind of, you know, it all spoke to me, and you know, it's kind of, I guess, sort of formed the nucleus of, you know, who I've been ever since then. You know, I'm 53 and I'm still skateboarding and I'm still playing music and still making art, and so are a lot of my friends. You know, it's not uncommon.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on this a little bit, just kind of out of my own, you know, as the moderator of this, I can sort of use my own personal curiosities.
Sure.
Talk to me a little bit about the skateboarding sort of scene in DC. I mean, I grew up here in Boston, where there was a small one, but it wasn't really big. It's not like it was out in LA or in other
Oh, it was
areas.
Boston had a great scene.
You did think so. I didn't know. I don't know much about it, but tell me a little bit about the DC scene. Like was it vibrant? Was it inclusive? Like tell me a little bit about, you know,
Yeah, it
what
was
you
it was
experienced.
very vibrant. It started in the late 70s with the big skateboard boom, and then right around 1980 it all died as far as it being a commercial thing. All the skate parks of the 70s closed. There's no place to skate. Pretty much everyone had stopped skateboarding except for kind of a core few group of guys. And those guys kind of like, you know, paved the do-it-yourself ethos of, you know, building a ramp in your backyard instead, going into, you know, DC and, you know, skating the empty, you know, public fountains. I mean, like, you know, just kind of skating, not using the fact that there were no skate parks anymore as an excuse to not do it. It was like kind of eye-opening to, you know, well, you know, what can we do? So it became like a homegrown scene, basically built mostly around backyard ramps. And there's a really great documentary called Blood and Steel, and that's about a ramp at the Cedar Crest Country Club just outside of DC. That like that was this crazy, it's a crazy story that also deserves its own, you know, its own episode as
Discussion?
well. But basically it was a big huge ramp out in the middle of a very derelict and sketchy country club where you know, bands like Guar would come play, the Bad Brains would
No
come play, so people
way.
would go out in the middle of freaking nowhere to where this big ramp was, and they'd have bonfires, and like, you know, if you'd see Fugazi play there, I mean, it was so it was a pretty rich and vibrant scene. I mean, you know,
I
again,
think you
music and
used
art.
I think you used the word sketchy and country club in the same sentence, and I think that might have been the first time ever that that's happened. So bravo for
Oh,
that.
no, I worked at a sketchy country club growing up. I think they're more common than you think.
Oh, that's great. And so yeah, so here's a general question before we move on to our next one. So you're obviously, you know, telling me a lot of really great things that are inspiring you. Did you ever have a sort of a dream or desire to be like, you know, I want to get out of the DC area, there's other areas I want to check out? Like, was there ever like a wanderlust that you had, you know, once you realized like I can jump in a car or I can jump on a plane? Like,
Sure. Oh, yeah, definitely so. I mean, you know, the kind of nice thing about being in the DC area is like you're so close to New York and you're so close to Philly. I went to school in West Virginia, which was very close to Pittsburgh, so I kind of, you know, got into that scene. But yeah, after college, I lived in Baltimore for a couple years, then just kind of ended up in Boston, sight unseen. And man, Boston was like a complete eye opener for me. You know, just the wealth of what was available culturally. and I guess it has a lot to do with it being a university town. You've got like, a whole big monstrous ocean of ideas all kind of coming together into that area. So I guess, harkening back to the bio that you read, yeah, I mean, there was reggae, living in Somerville, so close to Cambridge. I mean, I didn't even have to go into Boston. I mean,
Yeah.
with Middle East and TTs and Man Ray and Western Front,
The,
all
the,
there in the Central Square area. I mean, holy crap. I mean,
Yeah, we call it the Somerville Cambridge Triangle, where
yeah,
you realize like I don't have to leave this area. Like I don't technically have to go deeper into Boston because I have everything right here.
right,
Um,
sure.
for our listeners and our watchers, what year did you end up landing in Boston? Just
I think it was right around 92, and I stayed through the late 90s. I did see the Rat close, which was, sad, but I've seen them come and go before. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think I got there at a pretty good time. I mean, the scene in DC had kind of like sort of fractured and wasn't quite as vibrant in the 90s. So for me, it was kind of a respite to like go to Boston and kind of see these little homegrown like kind of micro scenes, based around bars like Abbey Lounge and there was
fun
one over
memories.
near me when I lived in the Fenway. I think it was called the Longwood or Longview. Uh, it was a rockabilly club
Oh wow.
right there, like by Fenway Park. I mean, just in the middle of a neighborhood. Like I don't know how anyone would have known about it, but it was super duper popular.
Yeah, you're entering into Boston in '92, Boston Cambridge, if you or Somerville, if you want to go lump all together. 92 is a great 92 is a great year of sort of change and transition in a good way, not only in music venues, but in nightlife. It's a year, hearkening to our book, it's a year that's a big change in Man Ray's life. But one thing I would like to maybe transition to, because you are a musician, 92 starts a new sort of renaissance for different bands coming to places like TT the Bears and Middle East. And um, definitely love to hear about what you found the musical pulse of Boston, Cambridge during your years there. Like I said, the booking agents were on point in regards
Yeah.
to these places. What did you experience musically, and how did that sort of move you in different directions musically?
Yeah, well, it like kind of well, it moved me in all of the directions. I remember the first show I saw when I got up there. I mean, I didn't know anything about Boston prior to moving up there. I ended up over at local 186, which was where I guess the original Bunratty's was. That's where it was, and I saw Sam Black Church and Tree. And for as an old hardcore punk guy like me, I mean, those were bands that I really freaking loved, and to see them both on the same bill there. The next night at the Paradise, I saw the Cranes, which was a big shoegaze band. You know, a mile or two apart, like two completely different types of venues, but those were like my options. Uh, my wife, who I'd met while living there, she went to BU. She was, definitely more steeped in the Boston thing than I was. She just
Mhm.
was and still is a big ska fan. So I kind of got the crash course in Boston ska.
How many Bim Scala Bim shows did you end up going to?
Oh, plenty. Steady Ernest was also, a big favorite of ours. Boss Tones were just kind of sort of, starting kind of like their big rise right around then.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, that was kind of a nice counterpoint. It's not my favorite of the subgenres, but I could definitely appreciate it.
If you're
Any
trying to
music where
impress
you can go just have fun is like, you can't sneeze at that.
And if you're trying to impress, the ladies, and you're like, "Oh, I love ska," sure.
Yeah,
But
yeah, sure. I mean,
uh,
I grew up, like very much into hardcore punk, but I was lucky to go to a college that had a great indie club. Went to WVU, and we had a club called the Underground Railroad, and I got to see everyone from Dinosaur Jr. to like, really, really great reggae, like Awareness Art Ensemble. I saw Abby Hoffman speak there doing like a book tour. You know, college did what college is supposed to do for me, and it opened my mind up to, all the things that you can be open to, as opposed to staying in your punk or your metal or your top 40 lanes.
Just so we can give our listeners sort of a general idea. Can you draw some similarities or differences between the DC music scene and the Boston music scene that you experienced?
I think kind of one of the biggest, I guess, correlations there is they were smart scenes. They were scenes that tend to be made up of very smart and driven people. The DC scene has always been kind of known as different than a lot of the other kind of like big metropolitan punk scenes, in that a lot of the participants were kids who parents were in the State Department, kids who had gone to like, different alternative private schools, etc. And it was and you can tell by the lyrical content that it wasn't just, wasn't a lot of I hate my parents, I hate Reagan, blah blah blah,
Yep.
society sucks. It was there was a little bit more of a gravitas, I think, to the DC punk scene. And I think Boston being, a big university town, I think that, there was a sort of a smartness to the scene up there. Wasn't it seemed like it was a little bit more deliberate and
Yeah.
and open. The horizons were pretty wide. So I think that's the parallel that I draw there, and I feel pretty lucky to have been part of both of those scenes.
Yeah, I mean, many people just experience one music scene all their
Sure.
lives, and you've been able to experience at least two, and that's pretty impressive. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Um, so yeah, let's talk a little bit more about Boston venues. So we're going to be looking at some artwork that you've done in regards to these venues in a little bit, but I'd like to get your sort of like, in your way, give me your pulse on these venues, like some of the ones that we have that we're going to be talking about. Tell me, what venue stood out for you as impressive, and what stood out for you as sort of like, oh, I can't believe I have to go to this place, but I'm going anyway. Like
Right.
what venues, and you can include venues for music and venues for nightclubs in this part of the discussion.
Sure. I think my kind of like home away from home was always the Middle East. I think that was kind of my cheers while I was up there. And the nice thing about Middle East was it was like it could be anything you wanted it to be on any given night, whatever your mood was. If you needed a place to go eat dinner, it was your restaurant. If you needed just like a bar to go hang out in, like the bar upstairs was just, your bar. If you wanted to see an acoustic singer songwriter, they had the upstairs bakery room where you could see like smaller acts or, poetry readings, I think sometimes. Or if you just wanted to like, go to hell, I mean, like, whatever was playing downstairs in the basement, like it was usually like, a banger. I think one of my first dates with my wife was I took her to go see Greg Ginn, Black Flag, and his band downstairs, and it was loud and it was raucous, and all the people
Yeah.
who were missing Black Flag like showed up in force, and like it was a big scene.
Yeah.
So I think one of the other ones I saw Lunatics and Cycle Sluts from Hell
Oh,
down there, and that was a great twin bill. Meanwhile upstairs there was probably a guy with like his acoustic guitar, like
yep.
doing something for other people, and
And they have belly
that's what I
dancing.
really liked about Middle East.
Yeah, they have belly dancing in the corner and all these different. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
I think you hit that right on the head. As someone who grew up, going to the Middle East, it definitely is amorphous to whatever it is you want it to be at the
Yep.
time.
And I don't know what it's like now. I've kind of heard some, good and not so good about things about, the way it's being managed now. But
yeah,
I have my memories, and that's how it's always going to be to me.
I will say this, and this is nothing against the booking agents there now, but there was a definite renaissance in the '90s in regards to like, it could be rap one night, it could be punk the other, it could be actual rock, just straight rock and roll. I mean, it's really, there's so many different bands, everything from MC 900 Foot Jesus to to the Blake Babies to
Mhm.
Dinosaur Jr. To country. I mean, that's one of the things I really loved about the Middle East in the '90s and in the early 2000s, that it had a lot of just you know kind of never know what you're going to get, and you had a little bit of everything.
Sure.
So, what were your thoughts on TT's? It's next door. It's next door neighbor.
TT's was like kind of that was closest to my office. I worked in Kendall Square at the time, so for us after work, we were all 20 somethings, with no money and no responsibility, so we went out like a whole lot, like right from the office. So TT's was close by. Uh, One of my favorite things about TT's is we caught a band called Combustible Edison.
Yeah.
And if you want to talk about like kind of like styles and genres, just kind of like mashing up and like blowing up and, kind of coming out of left field in the 90s, Combustible Edison was kind of, that's the one that sticks out to me. They were the ones who kind of like brought back sort of like that Esquevel space age bachelor pad kind of like, lounge music that definitely harkened back to like that 60s like vibe. But the beautiful thing about them is they didn't make it ironic. They just actually just played it beautifully. And I guess they used to be a punk band called Christmas that was a New England band that I kind of slept on, but I really liked their turn as Combustible Edison, and that was one of my highlights from TT's.
I played Esquevel for my students this past semester, and they loved it. It was the only one where students came up to me because they played it beforehand, before classes, sort of like a palate cleanser, and they came up to me and were like, "What is this band? What is this? Can you give me a link to this?" And I was like, "My work here is done."
You've definitely opened up some eyes with that.
Did you find TT? And here's a question I always like to ask anyone: did you find TTs to be too small or perfect for the shows that were there? TT's has a notoriety for being a very cramped space.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but also I kind of thrived on that. I mean, like really, I was one of those people that liked, the proximity of people. I liked the sweaty, masses.
Yeah.
I was always in the pit for shows where they were, appropriate pits. I don't know. I just liked, the physicality of being around like so many people. But yeah, it was a small club, but I prefer that to the other way around, like a much bigger club and, more space between people. Sounds kind of funny to say during COVID, but yeah, I miss,
You don't know the old adage of you don't know what you got till it's gone.
Yeah, for sure.
What about Lansdowne Street? You're at, again, 92 onward.
Yeah.
Lansdowne Street is in its what I personally call its final throes of variety before.
You're probably right. Like, so at that point, from Somerville, I'd moved right into the Fenway. So Lansdowne Street was, that kind of took over from Central Square for me. Like, is the bar and club district. I could just kind of walk out my door and and I'm there. That was really a lot of things to a lot of people. I mean, some of the bars were like, dance club. I mean, I guess like Axis, was a dance club. It was a music club. It was it was a bar. It was kind of its own thing. To me, it was a little intimidating because it seemed like it was a little bit hipper than I was. As was ManRay, which is kind of funny. The dance scene wasn't necessarily my first choice, but it was there. My wife enjoyed dancing, so and I was there, so I enjoyed it while I could. But I guess on Lansdowne Street, Bill's Bar was kind of big. That was a place for us to kind of hang out. I think Elastica there on their first U.S. tour. It seemed like every bar on Lansdowne Street like had the propensity for like getting some good band to play there.
Yep. Yeah, well, you were there at the time of Mamakin, and
Mamakin had just opened up. I think while I was there.
And people laughed at Mamakin, but they brought in some amazing artists. Like they had Poi Dog Pondering come in and play, and they had other bands. They had I liked Mamakin because it was a place where like front people in bands could go and do like a set on their own. And
gotcha.
And maybe you didn't know about it because it was people laughed at Mamakin because it was the band that
thing.
Yeah. But I'm like, no, there's a lot of gold there. You just got to go in and mine it. So
yeah, full disclosure, I never set foot in there. So
there's a lot
of one way or the other.
It wasn't the nicest setup of a venue. Like I have to say, like if I was to see a show at Access or Avalon, it probably was a little bit better. But again, you would get gems that would be there, and it would, and
Yeah, I can believe it.
that's awesome. And then let's ask, well, to finish this question off. Let's ask about Man Ray. Like, tell me a little bit about your interaction, however it was with Man Ray, as whether it was seeing a band or going dancing. Like what were your initial thoughts of the club before
Yeah,
you
well,
stepped in?
that's funny. Man Ray was like kind of a unicorn, like in my eyes. I mean, in DC, you had like a dance scene. Um, you know, you had the warehouse district was where all like the big gay dance clubs were, and you know, all the girls we knew always wanted to go to those clubs, so we all went to those clubs, and they were a ton of fun. You know, very inclusive. We had a great time. But they're primarily dance clubs. In Baltimore, you didn't have those type of dance clubs so much, but you had a big industrial scene.
Mm,
Um, Industrial and goth. I
yeah.
don't know much about the fetish world in either of those two cities, but I just know that when I first discovered Man Ray, I was like, holy crap, this is like this crazy eye of a hurricane of all these like kind of extreme, swirls of like subculture. It was dark, it was a little sinister. I mean, I'd heard rumors about it before I even set foot in there, and yeah, I was pretty intimidated going in there the first time. I don't think I've ever seen any bands there. It was primarily like dance nights, where I would go. There was one occasion where when you mentioned you talked to some of the bartenders and doormen.
Yep.
I'm sure one of the doormen you talked to was the one who refused the entry for looking like a preppy, a drunk preppy, which we'd just come from after work, big happy hour, and I was still probably wearing my tie, and it's probably around my head at that point, and they just completely like barred me entrance, and probably rightly so.
Look, I will tell you this, even as someone like myself who from 92 to 2005 was a Man Ray regular, there were years, deep years into my time at Man Ray where even I was told, you can't come in looking like that.
Yeah,
And I thought to myself, I got a little airs on. I'm like, wait a second, this is my place. What are you talking about? And they're
yeah,
like, and so there were times in which the door people were a little bit more uh forward than you would want them to be in regards to, and sometimes they weren't. Sometimes they're like, yeah, just come on in. So
no, normally it was all fine and a good time, and I was definitely kind of more of a fly on the wall of that scene there, just kind of like taking it all in. But
yeah,
through the lens of hindsight, I mean, and it's probably one of the reasons you wrote this book. I mean, you have to realize there was kind of like a beauty to that. I mean, it kind of like sort of carries the whole like speakeasy ethos of like the 20s. Like not everyone gets in, or
yep,
not all the time. And that sort of makes it might piss you off at the time, but maybe it kind of makes it sort of special, like in hindsight. At least
yeah.
your feelings aren't hurt anymore.
Well, one of the earlier one of the earlier managers and actually the artistic creator of Man Ray used the word curate. And I like that. You're curating a crowd. It's not like, and as pretentious as like the Studio 54, like Ian Schrager, Steve Rubell thing might be, in a weird way, I understood what they were doing. They're
Sure.
curating a crowd. You're building a mystique, which doesn't mean you can't let others in. It just you're creating something, and I like that idea. And many people took that and used it in different ways as Man Ray went on in its 20-year history. So I think I think if done right, there's nothing wrong with it. If you get someone that gets completely into their head, and it can be bad. Yeah. Like
Sure.
there doesn't have to be a velvet rope, but at the same time, you can
There
still
kind of
have
was one.
there kind of was
There
exactly.
kind of was one. But to
Um,
tell the truth, I mean, that was kind of a counterpoint to, it was a more proletariat type of nature to like most of the other music clubs in town. So okay, if there's one that's sort of a little extra special. Actually, to tell the truth, Western Front wasn't always welcoming to me either. So
really.
yeah, but that was the way it was with the reggae clubs in DC as well. I mean, there was a bit of a race wall sometimes.
Well, one of the things that we've tried to talk about in the book, and we feel has come out really, really, strongly, is that while while you would go to a place like Avalon or Venus de Milo, you'd get in. Like they want your money, they want your
Right.
body in the club, but you're not thinking, all right, after you get out at 2 a.m, I'm going back to Venus de Milo next week. You're like, maybe I'll go in a couple of months, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. ManRay was a place that you went back every week. You met your people there. It was, even if there was nothing going on, you knew like I could still go to ManRay and see my friends. And I feel like that's not normal in clubs. I feel like clubs tend to go the route of, you pay your exorbitant fee to get in, you pay your expensive drinks, you people gawk, you dance a little bit, and you leave, and maybe you come back, maybe you don't. ManRay was a little different than that. The chances of you coming back were infinitely more greater than not coming back. So
well, I think that harkens back to the word curation that you brought up. I mean, they curated, their crowd and their scene, and and their mystique. So, big clubs don't do that. Like you say, big clubs want your money. Big clubs usually aren't around for like more than 3 years, So,
yep.
and the promoters and owners know that, they strike hard, they strike big. And, I mean, what the Lyons brothers owned pretty much most of those clubs, didn't they?
Yeah.
They
And
knew
then
what they were doing.
And I always remind people like Studio 54 only lasted for what, like 20 something months. Like it really wasn't.
Well, the first time around,
The first time around,
it reopened. There's another great documentary about that. That's a couple years old now.
But ManRay was what it was for 20 years.
That's again a unicorn. I mean, I don't know of any other clubs that have had that kind of longevity while still keeping the same level of mystique and interest.
I think you find them actually internationally more than you would find in
Probably.
the States. Yeah. So before we dive into your artwork, I just want to verbally say, and we will have it in our chat room as well, that your art is available for purchase. You can visit steveshook.net. That's STEVESHOOK.net. And you have so many great opportunities to look at some of the stuff we're going to be looking at that are venues that are not Boston and Cambridge specific, and other artwork that Steve has done. And he has pricing already there for each of the pages. So please take a look, and please, it's such great work. It needs to be in everyone's living room. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to share my screen, and I'd like to go through some of your Boston prints, Boston Cambridge prints. And I'd like for you to tell me a little bit about, the venue itself. And I know we've talked about a few of them, but you can give me whatever you want. And then I'd like to just ask you a few questions to give me what inspired you to choose this one in particular, and any challenges that you had in creating this specific print.
Okay.
Any challenges or anything that you found came to you very easy, and just your general thoughts on the print. So
sure.
I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll go this. Can I have someone confirm that they can see the screen?
I can see the screen.
Wonderful.
Confirmed.
Okay. All right. So the first one I'm going to look at is the Middle East. And tell me a little bit about what inspired you to want to do this specific print, and just anything you want to talk about, whether it's, colors or just in general, your thoughts on it.
Sure. Well, okay. Going back to colors, the pop art palette for me is, kind of sort of my North Star. I do take a lot of liberties with colors. I mean, yeah, the Middle East is basically kind of the bluish, purplish, grimace looking, kind of building on the corner. But I mean, the font in that, in the sign there right now, that always got me. I thought that had one of the coolest signs of any of the clubs. Plus, the where it was situated on that kind of cool, crazy corner. It just this kind of sort of set a perspective that I tend to use in a lot of my prints, especially my more recent ones, where it's kind of an offset, angular view of usually of the entrance or facade of a club. Again, this, Middle East for me, like, is just, chock-a-block full of like good memories. So it's kind of a no-brainer for me to do this one. Um, I kind of my technique for a lot of clubs, especially the ones that are bygone, is I will try to find like archival photos, logos from old matchbooks, any kind of like sort of like ephemera that I can sort of like kind of use as a reference to piece something together. Um, Fortunately for me, the Middle East was still, still stands, so it was easy for me to go ahead and just, get my own picture for this. Um, I took a, I'll if I'm using my own photography as a base, I bring it in and kind of do my own digital drawing over top of it, and I kind of separate colors like I would like if I was silk screening, which kind of gives it that sort of like pop art posterized look.
Mm.
Um, with the kind of skies I use in a lot of my artwork, I just sort of wing it. I'm big on the rising sun thing, which
Yep.
comes from 80s skateboards. So there's a lot of different permutations I use on the rising sun. This one I guess is a rising night sky for no real reason.
One of the things I love that you added to this was the swirls in the windows and the door, because it reminds me of those cold days when I was like going to the Middle East, and you would have that like there it maybe wasn't so clear because the constant opening and closing of the doors, and you couldn't look right in at the in the immediacy. So I
Sure, I
re-
could
I
see that.
really I really like that. That was something when I was looking at this print that really struck out as impressive.
Okay, that's interesting that you noticed that. It's a treatment that I kind of came up with a while ago. Like, actually, I think my print that I did for the rat, which I had done prior to this, it's something I used when I created that one, and I sort of liked the effect. And for I think a kind of a little string of my prints, I ended up using that same sort of treatment, just to kind of like obscure the doors and the windows, but still make them a little bit, make them kind of
Yeah,
interesting looking.
yeah. No, that's
I'm
I
glad, I'm
think
glad, I'm glad you pointed that out. That's cool.
well, I can tell you just from experience. That's one of the great thing I love about your artwork is that it screams like for people that have gone there, it's experience. Like
Okay,
I feel like I've experienced that moment that you capture. So thank you for that. I
oh, that's
appreciate
awesome.
it.
Thank you.
So the next one we'll look at is Axis, a now defunct, long gone club. So even hate saying the word long gone, but talk to me a little bit about this print. And again, you Middle East, you had it there. This is now gone. Tell me a little bit about the makeup of this.
Yeah, this one was kind of a labor of love. Being on like kind of these Boston Facebook forums, I'll talk to a lot of people who are DJs at these type of clubs here, and sometimes they will send me an email. They're like, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing Access? You sit, or blah blah blah. I used to DJ there." I'm like, "Wow, that's a great idea," because when I lived right around the corner from Lansdowne Street, like Access, is still looming pretty large. Favorite memory from there is actually I saw Fishbone there at
Oh,
a very interesting time in their career when they were between record labels and couldn't play any of their old back catalog live, so they just winged a whole brand new set. A lot of people think of Access as like a dance club, but I definitely saw some pretty good shows there. Um, yeah, I think there's a DJ. I'm not sure what his DJ name was, but Dwayne Bruce.
oh yeah, Dwayne. Yeah,
Okay,
Dwayne's one
Dwayne.
of
I
our.
think Dwayne was the one who like reached out to me and asked if I would consider doing an Access print. And there's almost like nothing online as far as like reference material for it. And now the building is gone.
Just to let you know, Dwayne's one of our interview subjects for the book.
Oh, okay. He's a I've not actually met him firsthand, but when my wife went to BU, she would like go see him spin. So
Yeah, he did that. He did a lot of the X nights. He was an FNX
yep.
DJ.
The X night with that. My wife was the X night queen apparently. So
we probably
so
we
that meant a
probably
lot to
shared
her.
space in the dance floor. I used to go to X Night all the time, and
Say that again.
we probably shared space in the dance floor if she was there a lot, because that would be me and my friends. We Friday nights would be Man Ray, and Saturday nights would be X Night. So
Gotcha.
yeah. I
Yeah,
love the
so
color. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
yeah,
Continue.
the colors here are, sometimes I'll pick up a color in some detail and I'll just kind of go with it. The blue, I mean, it was kind of a gray, brutalistic looking building, not like a whole lot of like texture to it.
Yep.
Like a lot of other clubs, I mean, it really wasn't that attractive, especially in the daytime, you know.
Mm, that's a
So I
good
kind
point.
of like will sort of try to, evoke a feeling by adding different colors or different textures to things and kind of sort of try to capture the spirit of a building or what the club was all about. Um, to do like kind of a more literal interpretation of what Axis looked like, you know, in
And
my mind, it wasn't, aesthetically, it wouldn't do much as a literal representation. So,
I will say this: you gave in your print. There's much more color than I believe Axis ever had in its
oh,
existence.
I do
And
that a
it's and
lot.
I'm glad you did because in essence, like, I'm a nostalgic person at heart, so I even think of Axis and I'm like, oh, I miss Axis. But just seeing like the purple on the awnings and the purple surrounding the Axis sign, I think it's just such a great way to add a lot of love and color to what was, in you're correct, a very nondescript, you know brutalist looking building.
And a lot of the best clubs were like that, I mean,
Oh yeah.
it was definitely like all about what was on the inside as opposed to the outside, and that's how it should be. I mean,
Well, hopefully no one takes me to task for this, but I mean, Man Ray wasn't the nicest looking building in the daytime. It really wasn't, and it looked, I felt Man Ray looked more ominous in the daytime than it did in the night. That's just my own personal opinion, but we will talk
oh,
about that.
100%. I mean, yeah, when we get to that print, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean that's the one I probably took the most artistic license with.
But this is great. Is there anything else you want to add about this print before we move on? I will ask you. I love how you used like the rising sun for your previous one, and this is a little bit more sort of swirling, like black hole in the top right.
Yeah,
Was that just sort of uh, artist choice, or was there
that's
something
that's
behind it?
artist's choice. My wife works for the Scientific Space Telescope Institute. We have like a lot of like space and celestial type of like imagery kind of like around the house, and I kind of, I sort of gravitate towards the
That's
the
great.
Nexus swirls.
I love it. Thank you. So the next one we're going to look at, and I can guarantee you, all of those who missed this talk are going to be able to watch it, and they're going to squeal at seeing Deli House. I cannot stress for myself and for many people that are involved in this book how much we miss Deli House. So
Oh, it
please,
probably pretty much more than any of the other rock clubs. Deli House. I think this is the first time like I'd kind of decided to do a depiction of something that wasn't, a music or dance club. But for me, like living in Kenmore Square, like this was everything to me. And I wasn't alone. I mean, after Lansdowne Street, people ended up at Deli House. After the Rat, people ended up, Deli House. Like BU students ended up at Deli House. It was like, I mean, gosh, I honestly, we don't have a deli house in DC or Baltimore. I mean, this was, and now I guess Boston doesn't either. But yeah, this place meant a lot to me. It's where we went for like your hangover breakfasts. This is where we went after clubbing. This is sometimes where we go for dinner before clubbing.
mm,
And man, it was for a place that loomed so large for a lot of people. Like it was impossible to find very many reference photos. I kind of
yeah.
found a bunch of low res type of things. I sort of stitched together a collage and then I just, I drew from the collage.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. In our research for the book, it was very hard to find. In fact, I did a deep dive trying to find the owners of Deli House and trying to see if maybe I could reach out to them. And I kept running into walls trying to figure out like,
Oh, then I tell you what, offline, someone whose relatives owned it reached out to me and bought prints.
oh,
I will
definitely would
get
love to
so
know.
many stories from people buying prints about like what their connection is with a particular place, and a lot of times it's people who either owned it themselves or were related to people who owned it, or
That's
or they're still in
spectacular.
touch with the people who owned it.
That's
Yeah,
spectacular.
so I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure that I can get you a contact from Deli
Oh, I
House.
would just as the book's coming out, I would love to just let them know we wrote a book on Man Ray, and Deli House is mentioned. I don't know. Sam could probably tell you more. Huh? Sam's really good at sort of cataloging how many times something's been in a book. So I would imagine
It was a
Sam.
lot. Deli House was countless. That's
Yeah.
where we went after the club. We did that before going to the club. It was never ending.
This was my last meal as a Bostonian.
Really?
As we were about to get into like our budget rent a truck to move our stuff down to DC, we stopped, parked out, on Com Ave, and had one last meal at Deli House, and it was a Diablo chicken, which was the hottest thing I've ever eaten.
Yeah. Oh,
It was like Chernobyl orange colored. I think it was just like two bright orange chicken breasts and a thing of white rice.
Yep.
And the
that-
waitress was like, it's hot. I'm
my
like,
my
"Okay."
friend, my longtime friend, and used to work at Deli House. I would order that when I wanted to sober up a bit, and he always cared for me. He put a glass of milk in front of me, and he said, "You're gonna need this." And I said, "I'll be fine. I'll be fine." All that milk, it was refilled at least 3 times after.
It was that meal where I learned about milk counteracting like spicy heat, because like I think the waiter had his fun like watching my face like but and then he gave me the glass of milk, and
one of the things
helpful.
one of the things I just really love about this print, and is that there just seems to be such detail in the things that you wouldn't expect, like the I don't know if we call them sconces, or
That's a bow front right there.
yeah, like that, like there's such detail to that, and it goes down into the lower part, goes into the foreground and the background. You also do it in the top of it, and the hair salon and stuff. I just find that to be really interesting.
I'm very big into like architectural details, and especially like stone and brick texturing. Those are something I'm just kind of, I don't know.
Yep.
That's something I'm drawn towards, and that's so I tend to like to bring out those type of details, just the texture, and the architecture in Boston is just so rich, and the kind of Beaux Arts style, like bow fronts are just especially this part of town.
Yeah, and then and again, talking about looking at your prints and remembering things, right here in the bottom left hand side is an old like Bill's post where you could be able to put like different bands playing or anything like that. And I can't tell you how many times I had to wait for my friends who were trying to hit on the waitresses, and I would just stand out there and stare at that for a little while and be like, eventually they have to come out. But I remember that being there. So I just felt like this is an amazing print, and definitely I think brings a lot of happy nostalgic memories for us Cambridge and Bostonians who experienced it.
I'm glad, because it was actually that whole block there meant a lot to me. I mean, the Rat meant a lot to me. Deli House meant a lot to me. There was Nuggets.
Nuggets. Oh, I love Nuggets.
Nuggets was there. There was a great Indian restaurant, kind of, I think, on the sort of second split floor of on this block. I mean, this block of Com Ave like gave me so much.
Which is funny, because when you think about the other side of Kenmore Square, there's Narcissus.
Yeah,
and the Luna Lounge and all these different other places where like I normally wouldn't go. I definitely gravitated. And then if you go up the street a bit, you have the Cask and Flagon, and it's very much like your Red Sox people. And so it's not like that anymore. Like the Kenmore Square days are long gone, but oh man, definitely top 10 places. If I had time travel ability, I would go back to in the late 80s, early 90s for sure.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I've been back to the area since then. I think I was there maybe 3 years ago, and yeah, it's unrecognizable. I think this is all one big hotel now.
It is, yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
This was a restaurant for a little. It was a restaurant. I think it was called. No, it wasn't the Lower Depths, but it was called something. And I remember eating there with a friend and being like, "This used to be Deli House." Moving on, as we're going to stay in Kenmore Square, the Raskeller, aka the Rat, and
Yep.
definitely, I will say, for my own personal, I went to the Rat twice.
Oh,
Both
wow. Okay.
both was in 1997, right before it closed, and each time it was dingy and dirty, but I loved it. And I loved it because I recognized, I lamented that I never had the chance to go here during its heyday, but I'm glad that I stepped foot in the place and at least was there before it closed. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on the Rat and what prompted you to take this print and run with it.
Well, the Rat was, this is like my first of the Boston prints. I had done like a number of DC ones prior when I was kind of starting out on this, on this theme. For me, the Rat was, it was the real deal. It, stood the test of time. It was around in the 70s. It had seen so much. And, I recognized it when I was living there that, holy crap, this is like a living legend that's still viable. Its best years weren't behind it when I was there. I mean, we still saw, great bands. It was a good place to hang out. And yeah, my God, was it dirty. Everyone who pines away for CBGBs in the bathroom there, it's like, yeah, the bathroom at the Rat. Um, the story I tell is like the first time I went to the Rat, I had just started dating my wife, and she was a rocker, so I was pretty excited to go to the Rat with her. I was in the men's room, and there were probably, I don't know, 10 dudes in the bathroom. They're waiting, and all the stall doors had been torn off the walls. It was just there was no privacy in there at all. I mean, it was just toilets and cracked mirrors, and the floor was just so full of piss and gunk. I mean, it was about an inch. It was the most disgusting thing ever. And there in the middle of all that stuff was a $20 bill. The middle of the floor in that disgusting stuff. And I'm there with a bunch of dudes with leather jackets and, maybe heroin addictions, all looking at that $20 bill, who's going to take it?
Wow.
I was the guy who took it.
Bravo.
I took it. There was a little corner of it sort of sticking just above the muck line, and I grabbed it. I think everyone was impressed. I kind of earned some cred. And
you earned that $20 bill.
I went back to my then girlfriend and said, okay, the next two pictures are on me. And
spectacular.
I felt bad passing it off to the bartender, but she looked at it and she was like, yeah. That was my introduction to the Rat.
So I have to say, and this actually happened. I was actually at Charlie's Kitchen, and I had two. They were friends of friends, but they were with us, and they got into this discussion of what was the dirtiest, scuzziest bathroom, either the Rat or the Channel, and both were literally. If they had a pad and paper, they would have been writing it down, but they were making key points and counteracting each other and bringing up levels of pee on the ground and all this stuff. And I'm like, they're really getting into it. And I couldn't stop listening because I was like, I think I have to make a decision because, one has to win over the other. I unfortunately never went to the Channel, but I've been to the Rat. So I would have to say, probably the Rat, but the other person made a really good case for the Channel. But yeah, love to know about. And so there's something I have to mention. It's the first thing I noticed when I looked at this. The colors are beautiful, absolutely wonderful. But if you look at the bottom of the door, there seems to be, I don't know, a puddle or something. And I was wondering if that was deliberate on your part, or if is that my own interpretation? Or
it's kind of funny. That's another one of my kind of techniques there. I kind of use these sort of I just call them swatches. I mean, if I have kind of a solid surface that I'm trying to give some textures and depth to, I kind of go back to like my silk screening and just do these kind of like pop art color splotches. It really wasn't meant to be anything, though. When people look at my prints, and if I make those splotches red, people tend to think that it's supposed to be like a murder scene on the sidewalk. So I tend to like shy away from using red in sidewalks and streets, etc.
But I like it because walking by, even during the daytime, it wasn't the nicest front.
No, and it was just a regular brick front. I mean, hence since the red's in there. But this is actually I've done 3 different versions of this print because it's been fairly popular. This is the second, and probably the one I took the most like sort of like artistic detour with colors. So yeah, I mean, this is like the treatment there is pretty much it's just taken from silk screening. It's a lot of solid blocky colors. There really wasn't much above like the Rathskeller sign itself, and we talked earlier on about like Lichtenstein and kind of the pop artists who use for like the comic book Ben Day dots, etc. And that's sort of what I went with, kind of like above the sign, just sort of kind of kind of fill out the frame a little bit and give it a little bit of interest, and
No, and you I feel like you captured everything beautifully on this. And
I kind of wanted to give it sort of a comic book kind of like vibe, because I mean, it was, when I think of the Rat, I kind of think, I'm sure the Ramones had to have played there. I never caught them there.
No, I know.
But to me, it just seemed like a very Ramonesy kind of bar, and the Ramones are very much of a comic book kind of band, and like, in my mind, it all kind of.
If there was one band I wished I could have seen at the Rat, it was the Cars. I would have loved to have seen the early 1978, 1979 Cars playing the Rat. Just I love the Cars music, and so I can only imagine like being someone in the crowd during like one of the early shows and being.
You would have seen something really pretty cool. Just as an aside, I just read John Mellencamp's biography.
I almost picked that up. at the library the other day. Is it good?
He talked about like when he was early on and just got his first recording contract, and he was like in the studio, like trying to like put together his first album. The Cars were in the room next to him recording, and he was listening to them, and he almost threw in the towel and said, "These guys write nothing but good pop songs. I got nothing."
Wow.
So he almost quit because he was in the recording studio next to the Cars doing their first album.
Wow.
They were that good and that poppy.
Yeah, absolutely. And Boston based and just absolutely amazing.
Well, Rick Ocasek was actually from Baltimore.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's right. Okay, we got 2 more to look at. This one, again, this is nostalgic for me, but what has taken its place now is Sonia, which is part of the Middle East, but I go dancing at Sonia once a month.
Oh.
So in essence, this is one of the warmest art pieces that I look at, because I know that doorstop intimately. It's not the same, but I still know it. But
see, I know that parking meter.
Yes, those
that parking meter had to break one of my drunken falls one night. So yeah, I owe a lot to that parking meter.
So tell me a little bit about this print, and again, we talked a little bit about going to TT the Bears. What was your inspiration for doing this, especially at the angle you're at? Like, you've got it at a great angle where you could have done, you could have stood across the street and gotten like a straight view of it. Like, what prompted you to do it from this angle, and your inspiration?
Well, I kind of wanted to capture. I wanted to like get like the the parking meters in there, but like the sign itself was kind of a triangulated one, so a straight on kind of view would have had like the TT Bears place like kind of in duplicate. I kind of like the simplicity of this. Plus, it's also kind of sort of become my sort of signature angle. I think there's a little bit more interest in like kind of the angular depth to it. Plus, I like the wall that has like the whiteboard on it. Kind of making that sort of like kind of a forefront kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd actually done a version earlier where I had actually found a photo of like a of a band listing on that whiteboard, and I'd replicated it, and I pulled it after about a week or so. It didn't sit right with me, and then like I got a complaint from someone.
Oh,
Like,
really?
hey, you had my friend's band's name on there from like 1991. Like, like what happened to that one? I'm like, oh crap. Well,
Oh, wow.
so I had a version of it, like, so I ended up making a one-off for this person because the lineup I chose that night had their friend's band on it.
Wow. Wow.
So there's
Sensitive
somewhere
people.
out there, there's a one-off of this.
One of the things that I think is so amazing about this print is the following, is that from the angle you're at, and from if I was, it reminds me of how I would stand waiting to get into TTs. Like that's like maybe I'm outside of the line looking at the door, but it screams I'm about to walk into TT the Bear's place. And
Yeah.
I like that look, now I don't care who you are. You've always had to wait. So at one point in your life, you have to wait in line to get into a venue, whether it's a show or dance. And I feel like this captures that perfectly. That feeling of, all right, I'm waiting, there's no doorman, there's no one checking IDs in your print, but you know that once you walk in that door, someone's going to be doing that. So
then the thing I kind of liked about TT's as well, it was just, it was around the corner. It wasn't right there on Mass Ave. It was kind of almost like a little bit of like a secret,
Yep.
That's something I kind of liked about it. It had that neighborhood bar kind of feel to it while still being a club. And, Cambridge is like full of like the neighborhood bars. I mean, I've got another print, giving the Plow and Star some love.
Fallen Stars, yeah, absolutely. Still there,
Yeah, I
still
saw G
plugging along.
Love there when he was first coming up.
That's
I thought he
awesome.
was a Boston musician for the longest time because I'd see him at Harper's Ferry over in
Yep.
there, or at Plow and Star.
When it was G Love and Special Sauce. Oh, they
Yeah,
used to
I see him I just saw him solo before Special Sauce, or or
yeah. No, it's just such an amazing. I love the especially if you look down the street a bit. I'm trying to remember. Was that part of the Middle East that you entered into? I know right there now is that's one of the box office areas.
Okay.
If you look at it today, there's a box office window there, but and down the streets a bit is the entrance into
right
upstairs. But
yep.
No, this is a really great brand. And again, let's bring it all back to the parking meters. Absolutely great detail. They're still there. They're, Cambridge, circumnavigating Cambridge, realizing when the parking meters go off in certain areas, it's important. And I like to at least feel that I still know where the best places to park in Cambridge are. This area right here was always hard because bands would park there that were playing at the Middle East. You'd see, in fact, you still see it today. There's tons of band vans that are parked there because and then they're cleared out by 10 or 11 at night because they're all moving on to they finish their shows and then moving on. But yeah, this is just absolutely great. And we're going to move on to our last one, which is ManRay.
There it is.
One that is close to everyone's heart, but also so grateful that you allowed us to have it for the cover of the book. I can't even begin to tell you the raves I get when I tell people and show people this cover. They love it to death. So again, we don't have to go too deep. We talked in detail about your time at ManRay, but what prompted you to want to even include ManRay in your list of prints? Like what, was it something that you had thought of earlier, or did someone suggest it, or like how did it come about?
Yeah, this one wasn't suggested. This was kind of I guess to kind of complete the circle on what I thought were the key parts of the Cambridge nightlife experience. This one definitely held a mystique for me, and I think kind of like it's kind of menacing looking exterior, like lent a lot to like to the mystique of it. I also kind of took it as a little bit of an artistic challenge to kind of like take, it was basically like a black block. I think the door was black as well. Like, the walls were dark gray or black. But that sign, that that sign is just insane. That is one of the coolest looking logo. I mean, I know I was wolfing about the Middle East sign earlier, but I mean that is just like, that's just completely inspired.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
growing up, being a fan of pop art, like also ManRay's photography, like that's sort of a progenitor to to what the pop artists ended up doing. There's like kind of like Dada-esque sort of aura around Man Ray, the artist, and I thought it was like I thought it was a very inspired name for a club, like the club that it is. I thought it was very fitting, and they relate a lot just in their signage, I thought.
So it's in the book. I'll share it with you separately offline. The artistic and creative directors that opened Man Ray with Don Holland, that is Bruce Jope and Francis Toohey, came up with a manifesto about the idea of Man Ray, of what the kind of club Man Ray, and they came up with the term, the art of nightlife. And I'll share that with you offline. And it's so inspirational. And it's honestly, even after Francis and Bruce left, it really was the ethos of this club, pushed on by DJs Chris Ewan, Don Holland, the owner, Terry the bartender, ML, all sorts of people that walked through the door really kept to the idea that this was art, that going out and having fun was art in a way.
Oh, you could tell everything was very deliberate there. I mean, there wasn't, you didn't get a feeling that the things were sort of happenstance, or even just kind of evolved, without any kind of thought there. I mean, it did seem that, again, your term curation definitely applies to what they did with this particular club.
Yeah. One of the things that drew me to this picture, and now that we're doing this, I will tell you, and Sam can back this up. I saw this and went to Sam and said, I found our cover. I'm so intoxicated by this. And I showed it to her, and I showed it to Ted and Nina, and they said, yes, 1,000 times yes. Here's one of the reasons why. What you managed to do for a club that's very close to my heart. Now, if you looked at the Man Ray building, it's grayish, in a grayish way that you would maybe see as Access. But the fact that you made the brick purple, that's how I looked. That I always had a purple feeling about Man Ray.
There you go. It's the feeling. Right?
And you captured that. I think that's what jumps out at me, is that the building's not purple itself, but it does feel that when you see your print, that's how I envisioned it. Like I envisioned that. And you added the perfect color on the door, which was, maybe it was a little bit more black than it was, but you added a little bit more, lighter purple to it, and there is still black in the door itself. You captured the sign perfectly, and the rising, honestly, like the rising sun top is just absolutely perfect, because in a weird sort of like shiny way, the first time I looked at this club, I felt like there was an aura about it. There was something about it that's, everyone had told me, oh, there's crazy people in there, and you're going to Central Square, you're going to get stabbed. And I honestly feel like Central Square is one of the most safest places in the world. I know that sounds weird, but maybe it's just because
I don't know back then. I got some other stories.
Maybe not back then.
That might contradict that, but
I will say that I've just never experienced the bad. I've never experienced, the only bad moment I ever experienced was when my girlfriend actually got me kicked out of Man Ray. First and only time. She was underage. She was 20. I was 28. She asked me for a sip of my drink, and I said, if I do this, we're gonna get kicked out. And she goes, no one's ever gonna notice. She took a sip. I felt the tap on my shoulder. got kicked out. See, the worst thing that's happened to me in Central Square.
Oh, okay.
And if that's the worst thing, then I'm happy with that. But I just want to say this is just such an amazing print. People see it, they fall in love with it, and we're so lucky to have this as our cover. So I want to personally and on the record say thank you so much for.
Oh,
for
it's
that.
definitely my pleasure. I mean, it's an honor for it to be on your book for sure.
And one of the things that we all discussed when we were thinking about this was how excited we're going to be when, like, so for example, Trident, we're happy to announce Trident Books is going to have our book in their store. When people walk by and see that cover, I automatically know people are going to be like, I want that book. It's going to be at Hubba Hubba. It's going to be in other bookstores. I have a feeling it's gonna be such an eye catcher. So thank you so much.
Oh, that's definitely my pleasure. It's my honor.
All right, so I would like to ask one more question and then open it up for anyone that wants to ask any questions for you. Tell me what's next. Where do you see your art going, both musically and in a art, drawing art way? Like where do you see yourself going in the next couple of years or around the corner?
Yeah, right now I had just completed a series not too long ago based on a local DC photographer named Michael Horsley, who in kind of like the 80s, DC itself was pretty derelict. It was, it was definitely, at a pretty low ebb. And Michael Horsley had gone around and just like had taken pictures of what DC was like, when crack came in, when Reagan was president, most powerful city in the world, and there's this crazy homeless problem like right in the shadows of the Washington Monument. It was also a very rich time for punk and for culture there, and he captured these like beautiful, mostly black and white photos of kind of the other side of the coin, like, and it wasn't all doom and gloom. He took some really cool pictures of like, what are now vintage or bygone like restaurants or gas stations or, landmarks. I found him like, on a Flickr search, saw his archives, and I was like, holy crap. Like, a lot of these aren't rock clubs, but these are like kind of like bits of like Americana that means something, especially to DC people, these bygone restaurants. So I reached out to him and, developed, we formed a relationship. I'm like, hey, I'd like to do like kind of like art print colorized versions of like some of these photos. And he agreed to it. And it's since gotten a lot of good press. I think I mentioned to you offline a little earlier that Washingtonian Magazine now just did a feature in their current issue about that particular series. Which felt good. I mean, it's a little bit out of the boundaries of my venerable nightclub kind of theme, but I think it kind of it's simpatico to that. There's a nostalgia there, that people, I guess, of our generation kind of feel. A lot of our cities have like gotten very conformist, I'd say. You see a lot of like the same like chain stores and chain restaurants, in what used to be like kind of unique downtown areas, and we're all aware because we saw that transition. So I'm kind of my nostalgic side wants to say, hey, remember when maybe we didn't know how cool that old cafe was on the corner back then, but boy, we sure miss it now.
Do you remember in Central Square the Liberty Cafe? It was during the whole coffee house sort of revival thing. It was right across the street from the Middle East.
Was it the kind of two-story one, a very, very big and open?
It was actually underground. It was
it was underground, and it was very large.
Yep.
Right. Yep. They had, because I remember the thing about Liberty Cafe was they just had books everywhere. Just looked like a big lending library down there. And I read some book about the Brady Bunch. Like
that's an indication of like you don't know what you have till it's gone.
Yes, I do remember the Liberty.
And I would say that if you want to look at how different that is, look at Harvard Square as opposed to Central Square. Central Square is doing everything it can, believe it or not, to really keep this sort of like DIY, like interesting vibe, whereas definitely Harvard Square has become so generic and so cookie cutter, and you know, there's still sort of oases of you know, like the Grolier Poetry Shop is still there. You still have, you know, for a little while at least, we'll have the garage. The garage is going to eventually shut down, unfortunately.
That's where
You
the
know,
Newbury Comics was, in the garage.
yeah, that's it's become a shadow of itself. So you
Grendel's
still,
is still there, right?
Grendel's is still there. So you still, Charlie's is still there. So you still have a small amount, but I feel like you see it more in Central Square than you do. So I'm getting off the topic.
Oh no, I could talk about this particular stuff like all the time. And living in Porter Square, like I always loved what was going on in Porter Square. Last time I was there, the shopping center right there at the Porter Square T stop has gotten a lot
Yep.
nicer, which
Yeah.
I think is actually not a bad thing. It's got a great bookstore.
Have
And
you
right
have you
across the
been
street
to? Yeah, go on. I'm sorry.
right across the street from there, and gosh, I hope it's still there. There's a little club called Toad.
I don't know. I have
Toad
to,
is Toad might be the smallest club in the Boston area. It is tiny, but it is a jazz and blues club. Um, every time I would come to town, up until about 3 or 4 years ago, that's where I had to go at night. I might not know what the club scene's like anymore or where to go at night, but I could always go to Toad. There's no cover, and you're going to see some cool blues band on the smallest stage imaginable.
and that was in Porter Square, you said?
It's a Porter Square right on Mass Ave. I think it was attached to a restaurant called Christopher's, which may or may not be there.
Well, it's still there, but it says it's temporarily closed.
Yeah, I'd
So-
seen that during COVID too. I checked up on it.
And also Davis Square also is one of those great sort of like, does its best to be its own entity. And
Davis Square got a lot nicer, but I mean, I liked it when I lived in Porter. I mean, Davis Square was like 3 blocks down the street, and you had Mike's Diner there, which was one of my favorites. I think I saw Morphine at the
Somerville
theater there.
Somerville
Theater.
Yeah.
Yeah, Davis was a nice little treasure.
So I'll ask this final question for you. I'll ask this. I'll take my sort of like understanding as a dad. You're a father as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see your child becoming aware of the art in their life? Like where do you, as a parent, do you see that sort of formatting within them, and is that inspirational to you?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, so my son is 12, and I told you earlier that today he had his first concert with School of Rock. He's picked up the drums this fall, which is something we always kind of thought he was going to gravitate towards. The room I'm sitting in right now, I'm looking at 2 different drum sets that are set up. But yeah, I mean, he grew up. I mean, I've been playing music since I was a kid, and I still play in bands, and one of the reasons I kept performing, after a lot of my, peers had kind of dropped out of, the scene, is that I wanted my son to actually see me play, and not it being something that I just told him, hey, guess what I used to do?
Yeah.
I wanted him to see that this is like, A, I love it, and B, I want him to see that it's something that can kind of sustain you for your whole life. I mean, you could be a football star now, but I mean, how many people are really playing football past their 20s that aren't pros? I mean, it's nothing against football, but I'm like, to have like an artistic outlet or a musical outlet, that's something that can sustain you till you die. I mean, it'll always kind of fulfill you. And it's kind of, he's at that point in life now in middle school where he's finding, getting a sense of self. And I think having, a room full of art supplies and a room full of instruments and everything is now kind of seeping into him, and he's really kind of embracing it. So I take a lot of inspiration from it.
That's spectacular.
I figure that's something that I can kind of pass on to him as an option to for expression.
My daughter does competitive Irish step dance.
Oh, okay, right.
And
that's big in DC.
So I'm always enjoying seeing how hard she works at that, and she swims. She's on the swim team, but she loves doing the dance. So I feel like that's important, and it lets me sort of happily know that like when we're older, like that next generation is going to find their artistic, whether
It's
it's
definitely
drawing or go to a
gratifying.
club, or it's one of the things we pride ourselves in doing this book, was that Man Ray was a place that you found your people. And I
Yes.
feel like that's important when you're creating your art, or you're using the word that we've used throughout this panel session, is when you're curating what it is you like. And
Yep.
so
I think
what I
finding your tribe is definitely like, is an important byproduct, I think, of these kind of creative endeavors.
yeah.
And that's something I'm trying to, kind of impart upon him.
Awesome. Well, what I'd like to do is I would like to open this up to our audience. I'd like to, actually, Mike Baker has been a very patient audience member. Mike, thank you for joining us. Do you have any questions for Steve or myself or any of the editors of the book? Please interact. Would love to hear your thoughts.
No, thanks for having me. So the pop culture covers are really amazing. And I think we had one, and the question, Sean, but we have one question about the Man Ray cover, and I don't know if this could be resolved, but it seems like in the entranceway of Man Ray that it's almost like the silhouette of a person, and I don't know if it's just sort of like a optical illusion, or if it's just, if there's some intent in there, or if we're just seeing Jesus in the toast.
You'd be seeing Jesus in the toast. Yeah, that wasn't anything that would have been premeditated. So I think the Jesus in the toast thing, that's a great analogy for it. No, that wasn't an intentional thing. I very rarely put like people into these pictures. Sometimes I do, like the Axis one. I put some silhouettes of like some club goers out in front, but yeah, I don't put too many hidden messages into anything. They're pretty much what you see is what you get.
Since you bring it up, Steve, I was going to say, if you were really going to go for reality for the Axis print, you should have had someone like sort of like bent over, like puking in the street, because literally 2 a.m. That's probably what you were going to have. But I do love the silhouettes and the Axis. And no, Mike, thank you for that question, because you had brought that up to me, and I think a few other people had maybe mentioned that. Like, is there like
had they really?
Yeah. I mean, it's not in a bad way, but in like, oh, that's so interesting. Like, is that a person? And I'm like, I don't. And I just generally answered. Hopefully, I wasn't answering for you, but obviously, I said no. I don't think that was the artist's intention. I think it's just the way.
I'm looking at the print right now on my phone. Person in there.
And I like your Jesus in the toast thing, but I also like to think like the man on Mars thing was also like you remember how they had like the early scans of Mars, and they're like, oh, there's a mask on Mars, and so
interesting. Yeah.
But thank you for that question, Mike. Thank you. And I don't know. I'll ask one general question. So there's I'd love to get your take on this. It's something I've asked several of the people that I interviewed for the book, but there's a general take, even separate from COVID, that like the days of nightclubs are over. That there are dance nights, there are venue nights, but there's not a nightclub. What are your thoughts, Steve, on the possibility of there being a renaissance of nightclubs, or do you see it becoming more dance nights? Like what's your thought on something like that?
It's kind of funny. I think about this stuff all the time, like, because I'm in DC a lot, I'm in Baltimore a lot, and I don't, and maybe it's because I'm in my 50s, but I don't feel like I'm privy to like, what the nightlife scenes are really like anymore. But I do know that there aren't clubs anymore like the way that we knew them. And it definitely makes me sad, because I think it'd be something that I would want, my son to be able to experience. But what goes around comes around. I have a funny feeling there probably will be like a renaissance. I mean, we had a roaring 20s, 100 years ago, where things went kind of bananas, and I'm sure things are kind of cyclical. You have like depressions, world wars, and pandemics and stuff that kind of like, derail, the cultural norms.
I will let you know, Steve, you're surrounded by historians. All four of us are historians, so we agree with you 100%.
Okay.
In ways you cannot even begin to quantify.
I'm sure. So just from a layman's perspective, I think that I think that I think there will be kind of a resurgence in nightlife in some form or another. I mean, we're social creatures, and there's things have changed with people interacting online and being so engrossed in cell phones, etc. But the pendulums, they swing both ways. So I have a funny feeling that the not too distant future we'll see a return to nightlife at some point.
I'll take my old man River cred here and say how lucky we were to live in such a time where we actually remember nightclubs, where I feel like dance nights are fine and that's all good, but the ability to make a club your own, that I feel like that's separate from COVID. I'm not poo-pooing COVID. I'm just saying like in my view, COVID is something that will either be worked into our lives in a smaller way or gone completely, hopefully. But eventually the idea of going out and having a night out with friends will always be there. It'll always be part of it. And
I think so too. And actually, you just hit upon maybe what might be my new, elevator pitch, as to what I do and why I do it. I mean, weren't we lucky?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of why I picked the subjects that I do. I'm like, just to kind of say, hey, I know we were pretty freaking lucky to have had these scenes, to have these clubs, and we all remember when,
There's nothing wrong with that.
Oh,
there's
no,
nothing wrong. I feel like
I take a lot of solace in that.
And I think we can all say, like, when we get together with those friends that we experienced it, we have no problem. Like ManRay is such a huge topic. When my friends and I who used to go to ManRay get together, we have no problem being like, oh, remember we did this.
Sure.
It's comforting. And it's also, I think with age brings different perspective. I know that like I can look at situations then differently than I look at them now. So, and I think that just comes with age and with perspective.
Sure. Sure.
Does anyone else have any questions for Steve before we?
Yeah, I'll ask a question as well. What is your general approach to like a new piece of artwork? I know like if I'm doing humans, I always start with eyes. I have like a process that I have to go through starting. So I was wondering if you were the same way.
Yeah, I start with the sign. Whatever the identifying mark of say a building facade is, if that's what I'm doing, and 9 times out of 10 that's what I'm doing. Yeah, I'll start with the sign or the doorway, and then kind of build out from there. But the thing I tend to like focus on the most is like kind of like textures, surface textures of of the walls or the signs or the sidewalks.
Jumping off on that question, do you pick your colors immediately, or do you go with like, is it like sort of a rolling, like sort of I could try a little of this, try a little of that, like?
Yeah, it's a rolling thing. I'll tend to like I'll start with something in mind, but like I'm fond of saying like the picture will tell me what it wants, and a lot of times what I end up with is different than what I started with. But as the process goes, some things, maybe this shade or this treatment over here doesn't make any sense anymore based on what I ended up doing. So I have to go back and kind of like edit. So yeah.
Awesome. If there's no other questions, I think what we'll do is we'll bring this to a close. I want to announce to our audience and our intended audience that will watch this later that you can find Steve's work at steveshook.net. That's STEVESHOOK.net. His prints are ready for purchase. They make great posters that you will want to have in your living room or bedroom. And if I can also just plug this, Steve, is it true that you are creating ManRay t-shirts? Was that something you were doing for a while?
I did a small run of them. I'm using a print-on-demand vendor that I like quite a bit.
Gotcha.
I think if that campaign's already run its course, I can reopen it, and I'll let you know, and maybe I post on the Memories of Man Ray site.
Yes, you can also find Steve Shook on Facebook and as well as on his website. So I want to say thank you for our audience. Thank you to my editors. Thank you, Steve, for an amazing conversation and look at both your work, the larger history of Man Ray, and Boston and Cambridge nightlife. It has been a joy having you here.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really, really looking forward to that book. The historical perspective and the thought process that went into that club is something that I'm going to find very, very interesting.
We are looking forward to giving it to you, your multiple copies, and very much looking forward to having your thoughts on the book. We're really, really proud of it. There's a lot of early pictures of Man Ray, early inside the club. We've got some pictures of a Divine show. Divine played Man Ray, and
okay.
So yeah,
that appeals to the Baltimorean in me. Like
exactly.
John Waters and Divine are patron saints.
So yeah, we look forward to getting you your copies and having the book out. We're hoping at the end of December that is in our hands and in our mailers and off to everyone. So
awesome.
Again, thank you, Steve, for an amazing conversation, and everyone have a wonderful day and wonderful evening, and thank you.
My pleasure. Cheers.
Sammy.